little storytelling.
Yes. Earth and Star storytelling session. Yeah.
Beautiful. Um, so I've got a question on that in terms of just introducing yourself. Like, how do you tell your story? How do you tell about where you've come from? Is it based on where you were born, or is it starting from, well, I was in Sirius and I decided to incarnate on Earth? Like, what would be your personal creation story?
Wow, I didn't realize we're going to go plunge right into the depths together.
It's an introduction. You would
What an
say,
introduction. Personally, as I've come down to sit to write my own story, which has been a little bit of my own practice, is to bring the voice, like that true transmission from my soul. So I'm writing a story of my life, and it's more of my own, just for myself. It's this story, this life, this body, this incarnation, because it's where I have the most sensory connection to the memories, the depth of my heart, the longing, all that. And I feel everything else can add a depth and dimension to the story if I'm going to go into, thousands of years ago, once upon a time in the stars. But how I deeply connect to my story is in this body, in this life, because I've had the deep sensory connection to that in this physical body. It's imprinted in this body, in this being, and in this heart. So, and not to say I haven't died quite a few times in this journey and this story. So there's already like chapter one, chapter two, and they're complete radical changes in this earth story, but this is my earth story in this body. Yeah, that's how I feel. And I can color it with imagination and inspiration from other timelines, but this is where I feel most connected. What about you?
well, I was gonna just ask you, where were you born?
Oh, where was I born?
Mm.
Okay. I was born in London, um, to an Egyptian father and an Austrian mother. And I had visited Egypt. I think I was like 6 years old or something. I was quite young, and already I was like, I want to go back there. Like, we have to go back. So at like 12, I was at 12 or something. I was like, I really want to move to Egypt. So then my father moved the whole family there, and my sister was excited too. And so that was like the next chapter of life
Mm.
was there. And then I stayed there for about 10 years. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I just know you as a big proponent of almost like the embodiment of modern Egypt in some sense, and the voice of it in a lot of circles. Um,
Mm.
and yet, having, like, I'm born in Finland, very like Finnish parents, completely native to that population. But what I
Yeah.
encounter as soon as I say that is somehow having to justify that it's an indigenous culture. Like, it's not really
Mm.
taken as one. It's almost like, oh, like it's associated with Vikings and Scandinavians and Europeans, and I get really offended as soon as that happens. So I'm like,
Mm.
really from the beginning trying to make this distinguishment of, my language is completely different from Indo-European languages, and
Mm.
our culture was very separated from other European cultures for the longest time. Like, the Vikings are considered the colonizers of my country, the same with the
Mm.
Russians. Like, we were just this tossing thing between them. But so in some sense, Finnish identity is still very tribal, in a sense of trying to defend our culture and
Mhm.
have it exist and have it live on, um,
Mm.
which it is doing in quite a great like wealth status in the world right now. But it's one of these odd stories that I come across, especially having moved to and like Australia, which is a completely different story of the indigenous culture surviving or and not
Mm.
thriving completely.
Mm.
And I'm everywhere I've gone in the world, I'm always like, well, whose side do I fall upon? I look super white, but I actually feel like I'm representing another tribe coming to visit another tribe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if anyone does that, it's you, Mia. I mean, sometimes I feel like you have African blood inside of you from the stories you've shared of your journeys there and how comfortable you were to do that, which takes such courage and such like trust with the land to be able to do that. Yeah.
Mm.
But you just said something about like, so are you saying that there is an indigenous culture that's still in Finland that you feel is somewhat alive in the people? Like, does it have an indigenous or kind of shamanic culture? Um, would you say that it's still alive there, or is it more just buried in, fairy tales and
Um, it hasn't been buried to me. I know that, I mean, mainstream, if you just gaze at Finnish society, it'll look very Western and very modern. But the first and foremost pillar is language. Like my language, Finnish language, Suomi, is is onomatopoetic. It was created from the sounds of nature. Like no one's told
oh,
it to us. It's not a rational understanding kind of language. It literally
mm,
created, and it has a quite a lot of liberty to make poetry sound like an emotion or as an upwelling of a wave or a hoof of a horse or whatever is happening. So every time I start speaking Suomi to someone, they get it. They feel like it's a spell being put onto you.
mm.
Um,
I want to have a bit of your spell right now, Mia, when you say that. Put your spell on me now, Mia.
Maybe later. I feel
Maybe later.
embarrassed.
Okay,
My
later.
my
Maybe to
friend
end.
used to make me read like the lunch menu in a school cafeteria, and she would just get like chills all over her spine when I would say things like chicken soup with celery and carrots. But even that sounds like,
Mm,
oh, kanakeittoa porkkanoilla ja sellerillä. There's a
mm.
poetry inherent to it, and
Yeah.
the Sami culture of the north is where the really shamanic strains lie. And we also have a story of, the Suomi and the Sami kind of
Mm,
not getting along at all times and fighting for the land. So
mm,
there's a southern tribe and a northern tribe, and our
mm,
national epoch, Kalevala, tells the story of how these two were at war with each other. um,
mm.
so it's almost like the mystic consciousness and the more earthy, practical consciousness were separated somewhere in the mythology.
Totally. I can resonate with that too, with like the Egyptian story of Upper and Lower Egypt, which were divided, and then at some point they got united, and that it was like kind of the upper lower parts of basically our somewhat our soul with our body too, like seeing that disconnect of which is happening now a lot in spirituality is like really this emphasis on uniting our higher, so to say, energy centers with our base center. So how important that is. So yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
guess like that, what you just said comes to me as still being quite a niche. Like I've seen more of
Mm,
just purely upper chakra obsessed people
mm,
versus the tantrics and the people who are more earth bodied
mm,
or obsessed with health, for that matter, like anything to do
right.
with matter. There's a huge health movement, and then there's a huge
Yeah,
consciousness movement,
right.
and they haven't fully met. So I
Yeah.
feel like if we would be able to stir this conversation into this topic of like, actually, how do we connect those lands back together? How do we like connect?
Mm,
For me, it also goes into feminine and masculine. It's a very yin and yang kind of story,
mm-hmm.
at least
Yeah.
for Kalevala.
Yeah. Yeah, I can feel that. Also, the connection between our animal too, and our just like our humanness versus our kind of soul star spirit nature, and just the absolute humanness of having a physical animal body, and that union too. Yeah, I think this is like this brings up something like especially connected to Egypt, which is there's so much ascension work there. Like every time I'm there, it's Merkabah's light work, ascension, star seed, Sirius, Orion. It goes on and on, and codes and activations of codes and codes and I'm like, but what about the land that we're on right now? Like, there's a story here in the land, even to what we're seeing right now. That is the story. That is the mystery of the land. It's here now. It's in the eyes of the beings. It's in looking at what is here now. So it's the story of the land itself, and I find it really important to really bridge that together when working with land, and not brush away the story that's actually happened, whether it's slavery, colonialism, which is really big, I assume, in Australia, which is a big story that's somewhat been wiped out of textbooks. Stories of, power distortions, falls of civilization. These are the deeper mysteries or stories that cannot be denied, and I feel need to be integrated in ourselves because it's a part of us.
Mm.
It's a part of our humanity, like our humanity. So, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I guess in the sense, um, well, in as far as I've studied Aboriginal Indigenous culture in Australia, there's a beautiful book by a woman elder who says, where you're born, like you already belong there. So for a lot of
Mm,
kind of white Australians, I'm trying to tell them, like, you were born in this land, you are part of this land, like the land has birthed you, not just your parents. But then there is this bridge of, well, there's still this culture, and I want to separate the land and the culture that is
mm,
dominant on it at this moment.
right.
Um,
Mm,
because, yeah, like the Western white culture in the world, but also in Australia, looks very infant. It's just like, especially here, it's just so young and teenagey
mm,
compared to what was here before and what is living through the voices of the indigenous people here,
mm,
who have connection to the land and really feel it from a perspective of speaking for the land. But I feel like that doesn't, like, let's not take that for granted.
mm,
I feel like it is something that we need to earn, the
mm,
friendship with the land.
mm,
And
mhm.
like I would love to hear a perspective on it, because since you weren't born in Egypt but you felt the calling of it, and like how was, actually, as a question, how was that journey for you to like go into Egypt, and did you how did you connect to the land? Did you connect through the people? Did you connect straight with the land or with teaching?
Yeah, yeah. The first thing that comes up is the smell. I was intoxicated by the smell. Not to say it smelled good in any way, like landing in Cairo, but I remember there's a smell that just made me feel like home. I miss, like, I need to go back there often. It's just like, it's this certain, I can, and it's also the way the sun feels to me. Like, when I'm with the sun there, it's different. It's like the sun touches my skin, speaks to my body in a different way. It's like I'm at one with the sun, I'm at one with the nature there, even though there isn't so much nature. My mother is Austrian, so I visited Austria as a girl. Um, but I also feel it's the desert. It's that longing for the silence, for the stillness, in the absolute chaos that is some of the cities, and like Cairo. It's like that, like 20 minutes drive out. It's just nothing, complete emptiness. It's that contrast, and so for me, it was these very tangible kind of smells. It was the market, it was the sounds, it was the colors of vegetables, the fruits of the land. Like I miss the fruits, I miss pomegranates and figs, and I dig my feet into the mud of the Nile or around the Nile. It's my father, it's the family, it's the look of people's faces, it's the way people squeeze, until my bones feel like, I need to breathe. It's like the way the land has always held me when I was there. Yeah, it's just this deep love affair, It's like so deep, that I remember once there was like this question in one of the workshops we were at. It's like, what would you die for? Like, what would you live and die for? And I felt like it was the soul of Egypt. It's the land, It's like
Mm.
deep inside of me.
Mm.
And also the dance, the belly dance, the drums, women. Like, there's something so beautiful about how that snake never stopped, like the actual life current from the land never left people. It's there, it's
Mm,
alive in women's hips, it's alive in men, it's the sparkle of the eyes, it's the sharing of stories, morals, even the religion. There's certain things that I feel connect to the way it was, and it's alive in the people. So yeah, for me it's very tangible. It was never so much the essence, it was what's there, the rawness of it,
mm.
that really touches me about the land. I can go on for ages. I could write a poem right now about it.
You're making me miss Africa so much.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I want to go as well. As you're speaking of that, and I feel like it is that like comprehensive connection. Um, and I've only personally ever felt it in Africa,
Yeah.
which is the strangest thing. It doesn't make logical sense to me. I do not have, at least to my knowledge, a lot of blood from that heritage. But as soon as I went there, especially the last time that I went, I just felt at home.
Mm.
I was just, especially like landing in Cape Town after a
Mm.
while. Like I've been to four corners of it technically. Um, Landing in Cape Town, having this urge to go for like the past 2 weeks, it was a very rash decision of like, okay, I just need to be back there. I need to go back. And feeling at home, even if I've never been there, I just felt at
Mm.
home in the culture. By then,
Mm.
this was my probably third visit to the continent. I was adopted. I had been adopted.
Mm.
I had been renamed. Like I had been taught the dances. And somehow there's no other continent that has done that for me, has adopted me in such a way of
Mm.
showing how to live in such an
Mm.
elaborate way, from the dishes to the music to the culture that actually just like embraces you.
Mm.
And I have so much gratitude for just the indigenous kind of cultures of Africa having survived through colonialism. Like a
Mm.
lot of the people are alive, a lot of the traditions, the natives, the lines and the stories still
Mm.
live on, and the the myriad of them, the fact that there's thousands of ones existing at the same time adds to that richness of, hey, we're
Mm.
all co-creating something together, and it's still innovative and it's still accepting of each other, and everyone speaks five languages. Like, of course, we're just
Mm.
the tribes of the earth living together in conflict and in peace.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
there's nowhere like it, and I cry so hard to think that that has been taken away, for example, from Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, these stories, I feel they may rest under the sands of time, or they may, be buried, but they don't die completely. They're still live in in the beings that touch the
Mm,
land, or in those that were born there, or have genetic, ancestors from there. And I feel with Australia and Africa, they carry that, like, also the weight of the sorrow somewhat of where we've come and where we've gone to as humans, from being such incredibly in tune and in sync and at one with nature civilizations, to the complete disconnect. But I do feel they carry something for humanity at this moment, but it can never be glamorized or put into. And I find that there's still, like, sometimes spirituality wants to be boxed into something, or made shiny. But I feel like they really come forward. Maybe also with Australia, I feel like even more, because Egypt in a way has been put a little bit into, shiny magic codes. But Australia carries something very, very prehistoric and raw that I feel will have its time
mm,
as a voice, as an offering, as a medicine to the world. But that will be like, that is just like the raw connection
mm.
to being human on this planet. Yeah.
There's there's some things that I started watching. So I just literally a week ago got my visa to stay on this continent. Um,
Mm.
it's the seventh continent I've
Congratulations.
visited and stayed in. Um, and so I started watching all these documentaries about the history of it. I watched a lot about the stolen generation. I watched a lot about the prehistory of the natives and how, even Australia became inhabited, first of all, 50,000 years ago or something. It's such an ancient, like, we can't even start to understand how old it is. And then
Mm.
in the last, compare 50,000 years to like the last 200, that the peoples were kind of wiped away as a large portion. And the most damaging part is, I guess, the ways of the land were wiped with that. Um, the beautiful notion was that Australia was actually cultivated, like consciously, by the tribes. It was lash burned. They knew where the kangaroos were. They knew how to like plant certain flowers at a certain time, so that they
Mm.
always had an abundance from the wildlife that was already here. Um, and all of that knowledge has kind of been repressed. And I know that there's a lot of shame within the the settlers, let's call it, in coming here and actually having no clue what plants you can
Mm.
eat, how to connect with the land. When the rainy season
Mm.
comes, how long does it last?
Mm.
Like, how do we observe these things? Everything
Mm.
feels like it has to be learned from scratch. And as someone who kind of traveled the world, learning directly, as you said, like just going to the desert or just going to the jungle, and I'll speak to the jungle. I don't know the
Mm.
language of the local tribe. I don't know where to start making all these social connections that come with all the trauma as well. I wanted to speak straight to the earth,
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
and that requires a lot of humbling and a lot of, I guess, just stripping down of our own identity and story of
Mm-hmm.
being either the victim or the abuser of this land.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I feel like you're bringing it right to essence. And it just brings me back to how you even started this with the language, the Finnish language being just sounds from nature,
Mm.
which is like that language, even with the hieroglyphics, it's just symbols that come from nature that have sounds that are like even writing it takes the left and the right brain hemisphere. Like you have to have your artist on as well as your logical kind of scientist mind to be able to read it, which is very different to how we read language now, which is we look at language and but we don't have to spark our creativity or our imagination with the symbols, with if it's a bird or if it's water or if it's a loaf of bread, or which connects to different sort of like resonances in the body, that sounds and symbols. So sound came from nature, communication came from nature, like so much what you shared, stripping the identity to be a receptor to that note, or the notes of this of nature itself, and just yeah, being receptive to receive that and humble. Very beautiful. It's so different to like, it's just I can only imagine it, right? Like how it was.
And I guess,
Yeah. Mm.
there was
Mm.
it, like, I feel like there's this ancient part of that land connection that took a lot of time. It would have taken 1,000 years to create language
Mm.
such that it was in Egypt, or such that it is in the indigenous Australia. Like, all of these tribes had their own names for things. Um, and then I found some similarities with my language, which sometimes happens. Like, some word is the same across continents. And I'm like, oh, maybe we discovered that that word in nature actually was the true word of the thing. We're
Mm.
still just trying to discover what a river is. And until
Mm.
the river is named, it'll just be the sound of the river itself.
Mm.
And then we're
Beautiful.
trying to
Mm.
find, okay, what's the name of the river? And maybe every river has their
Mm.
own name depending on
Mm.
how they sound. And you have to sit by that river in particular before you can hear it. Um,
Mm.
and I really love that way. but
Mm,
it's going to take a long time. If we've forgotten,
mm,
it's lost. And
yeah.
now I'm really curious about all the mysticism coming in from the modern day consciousness perspective, all the
Right.
ascended soul star seeds going into realms and downloading the codes again. How do you yeah, you kind of mentioned it, but I'm just like, how do you feel? Do you find any truth in that? Is there a way to discover the ancient through that?
Mm. Yeah, I feel like they're like the little arrows on the path, but they're not the way itself, you know? It's just like the little arrow where we are as souls or as like, you know, a world soul heading, so they're like, oh yeah, that way. Remember what happened then, like, you know? But it's also remembering that like I question, are we going back? But it feels like we are here now as a civilization, creating that new civilization. There is a new language. Um, you know, not, and we cannot dismiss, I feel, technology as part of like the written records of this civilization that is and is coming, which I feel will be really entwined and synthesized with, you know, synthetic technology. And like, what is that story and how is that going to end? Is it like another Atlantis? And we are the writers of that narrative. So what are the sounds that we are using? What are the poems that are coming? How is art influencing that, which I know you're really strong about, like really touched by. Like all these civilizations were marked by renaissances, shifts in art, music, culture, stories. And I don't think we can move back to that story. That story is done, but there's definitely influences, um, and and it's connected to the ancient kind of grandmother story of our humanity. So we cannot cut off from grandma, granddad. Like they are the wisdom keepers, you know, like they carry that. So keeping them revived and alive, but also remembering we can't go back to grandma, granddad's days. That's done. So what are we carrying from that wisdom, and what story is being created? And I think right now is a really fascinating time to see what kind of massive conflicting and complementary narratives are happening right now, like at
Yeah.
this time, which is going to go down in history for a long time. Like we're in it, we're in the changing ages, we're just tasting the beginning of that. And I think as artists or soul wisdom keepers, or you know, beings who carry that indigenous uh, connection either through a bloodline or just through the heart line, will feel really touched by this time. And the loneliness of feeling alone in that narrative, I do feel the powers and the coming together where we decide on that narrative somewhat through our different streams. And like, what, how did ancient cultures decide on this is going to be N, this is going to mean river? It's like collective somewhat, like yes, yes, that is the river. You know, like a somewhat that like we decide together somewhat, so
Mm.
that we, you know, we bring a new order into this current chaos. So I'm fascinated by, and I'm here for that. I feel like that new narrative, that I can feel how the isolation can take people into, you know, that the edge of
Mm.
like the fear, the loneliness, and the dark. But in that, I feel is like the crispy kind of magic for the sprout of something
Mm.
new when we lean in together and come forward. So yeah. So I hope that this sharing inspires those who carry these kind of, that they also start to lean forward. So yeah.
Mm. Um,
Mm.
yeah, I'm feeling most, especially we are kind of born around the same time, which was around 80, mid 80s, 87, 86.
Yeah.
Um, that was the last time I think Uranus and Saturn were in conjunction at the galactic center, and we're in this cycle of um, I think it's going to come down to 44 years before they come together again. So at
Mm.
the time that we're going to be 44, um, it's ending of a cycle of the revolution and the renaissance of technology. Actually,
The
internet was
ending of
born.
that.
The
Oh.
internet was born around that
Mm,
time. Mobile phones came up. So
mm,
I've been looking at it as these chunks of what's been happening already in the last 30 years of my life has been a renaissance, like has been a huge expansion into a completely
mm,
different realm.
mm,
With it coming electronic music and computer
mm.
games, and our brains need to adjust to thinking differently. And yes, it's actually becoming again more glyphic instead of so written and wordy, like no one's
Mm,
reading books as much as we're watching visual stimulus from the computer screens.
right.
So in a sense, our brains are already like 3/4 of a way done with a huge adjustment period
Mm,
before starting another cycle of something else. Like every generation to me has some form of renaissance. This will be a
right.
very interesting one because I do feel like a lot of things are going to change.
Mm,
Having particularly studied cultures through movement, like that's been one of my fortes of like
mm,
embodying whatever everyone else around me is doing. I can kind of chameleon like
mm,
feel into cultures or feel into the land through the music or through their movements.
mm,
And I did a bit of study about electronic music and
mm,
how abstract it is, and the fact that there is no musician, there is no human soul necessarily
mm,
that's created that. Um, and then we have these raves and these new kinds of churches and parties that we go into electronic trances, just like stimulated by computer noises. Like that to me was fascinating. And as I started embodying that, I realized that by dancing to that music, I'm embodying abstract thinking,
mm,
which has not been accessible or possible to a lot of tribal cultures with their instruments and their music and their nature sounds. So we're literally entering into another dimension of
mm,
our bodies moving in different mechanic ways, our
mm,
senses perceiving
mm,
time in different ways. Um,
mm.
I'm super fascinated by that narrative, that new mythology coming in.
I love that you're sharing that. When people say, when did it happen for you? Like, how did you go from religious and veiled and conventional and uptight to who you are now? Like, not like I still work through things, but relatively more, definitely more free. Um, and I say it was one rave that I went to. It was my first taste of like real beautiful electronic music and my first pill of ecstasy, which last I had the phase for about a year, but that changed. Like suddenly I became the music, like the trance. And I think these ancient cultures really used trance, which is a very important part, which is really connected to the school of Isis or Set, is like shifting the lines, the memory lines, the waters to create new synaptic pathways, which is the rebirthing work, the breath work, the emotional release. It's all somewhat shaking things.
Mm.
But this electronic music, this trance, I definitely feel like something about it shifted. Like, I don't know what it did, but I wasn't the same after that. I was
Mm.
transformed because suddenly I was thinking differently. I was open.
Mm.
My body was open. Something had happened. And that was the beginning point for my journey to discover what, the deepening of freedom and love in myself. And so I think that's a very interesting point, is like this mythology of like our tribal so-called rave culture that a lot of us have been part of, that has brought us together as a tribe, like writhing to this trance like music. But I love what you're sharing is this abstract thought. And I could see the healthy, beautiful part of that, but also where we've somewhat disconnected then to the pulse or like the sap of nature itself in that. So, yeah, how do you see that? Do you see like it's connected us to a different type of nature?
I think so. I mean, in some ways, I see patterns that are the same.
Mm,
Like we're seeing, like
mm,
okay, that's a tribal revival, so it is a renaissance of
right.
discovering our like inherent connection to God or mystery or whatever it is that we get into these trance states. Like access
Mm,
points to trance should be human rights. to me.
Mm,
Like that's
mm,
part of our just connecting to the greater whole as a
right.
human being, to like the cosmic womb. Whatever narrative you put on it, it's completely up to the culture that you're embedded in.
Mm,
um, but then what's interesting to me about our kind of like creating from something else, the yeah, like I feel like the ways that we are communicating have changed rapidly with Instagrams and TikToks and messengers, and like text
mm.
messages were born when I was like 7 or something. No one used to do that.
Yeah,
um
I love that you said. I just want to say when you said the revival of glyphic culture, I love that. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it is a revival of glyphic culture. Yeah.
yeah, like just moods and things and expressions.
Mm,
um but I also like want to remember that these cycles come every so often, like especially studying kind of like the
mm,
astrological clockwork of our whole
mm,
solar system. There's cycles of 270 years with Pluto, which is like a
mm.
whole, like then you turn one as a country as you've seen a Pluto's cycle go by. America
When's
is
the
having
next
that.
one? Oh, is it
America is
now?
having that now. So I'm
Okay.
really curious what's going to happen in the States in the next even 5 years as they're going
Well.
through that. It's almost like a birth and death portal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but a lot of countries are not officially that old yet. And some countries, or like some lands like Australia, has gone through cycles and cycles and cycles of this. And I can feel, even if the wisdom's kind of washed and burned and gone quiet to our ears,
Mm,
something still remains. And my best tracking system for that currently is looking at the planets, is connecting to
mm,
something that everyone would have
mm-hmm,
observed through thousands and thousands of years, circulating with us, looking at
mm-hmm,
our planets as, whether we look at them as gods or whether we look at them as brothers and sisters, or
mm-hmm.
whether we put, glyphs onto them. Um,
Mm,
that's the true meaning of astrology to me, is
mm,
actually relocating us in time and where we
mm,
are in the saga, because these sagas also reassemble and have their own dramas and cycles
mm,
and phases
mm.
that I don't think we learn in one generation, which is the saddest point. And that's where we need the mythologies and the stories of coming from our ancestors to be like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, history did repeat itself. Plagues happened, diseases happened. Every generation has had some sort of a huge challenge to overcome as a people's.
Mm,
And I'm still waiting for the one that we're actually going to set on. Like, what's really going to
mm,
move us out of our asses
mm,
and into the
mm.
streets, or into the creation mode of this culture that you're
Mhm.
speaking of.
Right. Can you, as an astrologer, say when that's written in the stars, or do you feel like it's going to happen in the next, 10 to 50 years?
Um, it's interesting because I feel like, especially for the new age people celebrating Age of Aquarius, I'm like, but Age of Aquarius is going to be a lot of technology. Like, you don't
Mm,
understand how much, like, it's going to be higher mind and technology oriented. Like, we might become robots during Age of Aquarius. Biology is going to radically change. Um, so there's a lot of planets skipping into that in 2025, and I feel like we're seeing these pulses of the trends
mm,
coming in. So what I'm following now is like, okay, Saturn and Jupiter are in Aquarius this year, so we're seeing the glimpses of where those shifts are happening, including the cryptocurrency thing. I feel
sure.
like that's a bigger shift that will probably still be ongoing for like 3 or 4 years before we really switch our whole monetary system into a decentralized system of some sort.
Hmm.
And Bitcoin is just one experiment out of 1,000 that are ongoing at this moment, and
Yeah.
something's going to rise up on top of it as the most useful currency. that's going to serve the most people and is going to be easy to implement on a mass scale.
Yeah.
And like at this point, my best choice is not knowing, like not
Mm.
having the answers, but actually like
Mm.
observing the trends and giving some more patience to those answers to just actually come up and bubble up from what's convenient to us, like what are we actually using, what's a tool, what's a hammer that we're actually gonna, day in day out just keep using. um,
Right.
yeah, same thing with a lot of apps, same thing with a lot of these other things, but every time big planets change signs, that's a good symbol of something's shifting a gear.
Sure. I love what you're touching in on. Like I feel like the more journey is like to not disconnect from the reality of technology, of crypto, of the fact that maybe our RNA is going to change, our genetic makeup as humanity.
It's
We are
changing
going to
as
be
we
plugged.
speak. We're all
It's
getting
changing.
vaccinated by something that's operating with our DNA. Like,
Well, not
it's
all
already
of us,
happening.
but yes, but
But
so many are. That's true. So many are. It is already happening. It
yeah.
is. And the synthetic technology that is pumped into us, that I feel is just the beginning now of a new narrative for the next 100 years, which will be we are going to be plugged into software somehow or another, which could be great. It means we could reverse so much of all the things in the world that create suffering to really create a thriving culture, or it could not. Like we're really, it's a dance, right, of the unknown. But then I question the soul of, the soul. And with the soul, I feel like when you said that cryptocurrency that shakes the world, that creates the new groove, but it's embedded, somewhat I feel that has to be connected to the depth of our core, which is the soul of our humanity. As Bruce puts it so beautifully, like, we cannot, like, it is also the soul it's a soul revival nonetheless. And so I feel like what's that really has journeyed enough into the shit and muck of humanity that it revives with the pulse of the soul in it, whether it's a
Mm.
crypto, whether it's a new cure for something, but it's like coming from that place that's connected to timelines and to earth lines. And so is it in the beings that have created it? Is it them who the creators of such thing? Because it's created after all from man, so. And that's where I feel Egypt plays its role again, is these creators back then were connected to the soul of humanity, so to say, or the soul
Mm.
of the essence of what is, which
Mm.
is why they could create such structures to the millimeter, perfected, by cosmic sciences. But it was the soul that brought that about.
Mm.
Their devotion, their love, their humility, and their somewhat non-existence as an identity that could help them see things as they were. So that soul work, specifically with the creators of this, is very fascinating to
Mm.
me. And like, I'm involved in different groups that work with crypto and designing new crypto, but I'm always sitting there just the observer. like, why isn't it like, yes, no? But then I'm involved with personalities,
Mm.
creators, personalities that are still striving towards the light and the ideal nature that this is going to change the world. But I don't feel that is, because somewhat like the sap of our humanity that is enshredded and enclouded also in being a human soul in this world, and also even connecting to the sorrow and of what is, like not
Mm.
bypassing the feelings, not bypassing that song of the soul, if you know what I mean. I can go on with you so poetically. But yeah, in the end, I feel we create that. So, mm,
I feel
yeah.
like there's a point of almost like you're looking for the meaning, like who are the people, who are the souls, the creators, what's the saga, what's the mythology that we're actually in now, and like what are the
Mm,
values, what are the ethics embedded in that, which are
mm,
very deep questions. And there's a lot of criticism towards, the biggest media companies around not having ethics, not actually having a heart. Where's the
mm,
humanity of it, where's the feelings of it? So I think you're really voicing the big questions of humanity and why we're so like grappling on to like, maybe it's this that I need to do, maybe I need to do this one, maybe I need to do that retreat or this currency or this
Yeah.
job, instead of really feeling into what it is that you're here to do. Like, let's say we're all creating this new thing together, which is very Aquarian. The
Right.
next thing to
Right.
find would be your own form of how am I contributing to that creation? What's my
Right.
unique way? It's
Mm.
not
Mm-hmm.
designing crypto, or maybe it's not like, do it if you really have a hit to do it. But
Right.
otherwise, stay in the listening and the
Mm-hmm.
search of like wherever the answer is going to come from. And I do feel like there is something of a place to have it upwell from the earth as much as come
Mm.
from the
Mm-hmm.
skies as an epiphany. um
Right.
like
Mm.
I'm a big proponent of like, it is body based. Like, I want to keep the body involved in the next generations.
Yes. Yes.
Like, I will stay here and I will teach you to dance, like, God forbid, until you, like, your legs disintegrate because you've become a robot. Um, I will
Mm.
teach robots to dance if I have to. Um, like, that's
Mm.
just my soul's, like, joy and pleasure in the everyday. Like, I'm
Mm.
here to do
Mm.
that.
Mm.
I'm grateful to know that it's so
Yeah.
interlinked to that. But
Mm.
I feel we all need to find that, whatever it is, that spark.
Beautiful, Mia. That's such a beautiful place to wrap it up on, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Because just today I was recording a video um, uh, around what is your unique soul essence? What is your soul song? What makes you alive? That's it. Like, what's your soul signature in the world? That's all that
Mm.
matters. Not
Yeah.
what are we creating together, and let's put our brains together and discuss it. Let's actually sing it from our souls and be that and become that, and then vibrate together in that beautiful symphony that can come from that space. So beautiful. I just feel like the relevance of music, sound, art, especially song lately and dance, that I feel like has such a profound impact as us as beings. Like, as you shared so beautifully, becoming embodied, which is so important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Thank you,
beautiful.
beauty.
Thank you. I was so inspired by this sharing. I was like, I didn't expect to go so into it, but I knew it would be a journey with you. So I'm glad we did this.
Always a
Yeah.
journey.